Hello, welcome to the Modern Autograph Book, a PowerApps and Flow story, the second session in today's PowerApps Virtual Summit. I hope you all enjoyed Nick's opening session and you took something away from that. Hi everybody, I'm Matt Weston. I'm an Office 365 and SharePoint consultant from the Midlands in the UK. I'm an MCT and also an MCSE in productivity. I come from a very special part of the Midlands called the Black Country. And the Black Country was the heart of the Industrial Revolution for Europe. So I like to draw parallels that being in the heart of the original Industrial Revolution, that I'm now part of this new age Industrial Revolution where we're moving everything into a cloud-based society. Now, the Black Country, like I said, was very heavy industry and was well known for making some key pieces of history. The first being not the Titanic itself, but we made the anchor chain. So we actually contributed to the construction of that ship. I'm going to try and get the first geeky reference in this morning and say that what the Black Country is probably more famous for, and probably will be, especially after I enlighten you with the next slide, is that the Black Country was the inspiration for J.R.R. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings for Mordor. So in Mordor, the skies were orange, very, very smoky. There was no greenery, and that's because that was what the Black Country was like when J.R.R. Tolkien was still alive. So a lot of the greenery being cut down and was being used to fuel the fires of industry, and the actual sky glowed orange at night because of all the furnaces that are actually taking place. So if you take one thing away from today's session, is that Matt Weston comes from Mordor. But let's actually talk about what I'm supposed to be talking about, and that is the Modern Autograph Book. Now, as you can see on the screen, it's flashing that this is a gimmick. Whilst what I'm talking about and the way I'm going to demonstrate this functionality is based off the premise of an autograph book, I can guarantee that by the end of the session, you'll go away and you'll have at least a couple of ideas about how you can use this in your day-to-day business lives. So why have I chosen an autograph book? The reason for this is because I'm notoriously bad at holding on to pieces of paper. A great example was when I was a little bit younger, I went to Disneyland Paris. And like all grown-up children, I went around trying to find Disney characters so that I could have my photograph taken with them and to get their autographs. As you can see on the pictures, I got the photographs. I even got their autographs, but by the time I got back to the UK, I'd lost the pieces of paper that I'd managed to get their autographs on. Now, because I was so excited about getting those autographs and those photographs, this was effectively my reaction when I got back home. Exactly the same thing happened to me a couple of years ago. Again, I went to Disneyland Paris. I went to go and try and find the characters. I got their autographs, got their photographs, and once more, by the time I got back home, I'd lost the paper. By now, Office 365 was starting to become a massive part of my life. So I thought, okay, I wonder if there's something I can do to try and stop this happening in the future. So I looked to Office 365 and I could do with some heavenly music on this slide. And I thought, I know there's something that I can probably do using the tool set that I'm actually now starting to talk to customers about. Now, like all good end-to-end solutions, it doesn't usually just comprise of one single piece of technology or one particular solution. Exactly the same when you're cooking something. You need a number of ingredients to combine together to give you exactly what you want. And that's effectively what I've done with the autograph book. What is it I'm actually going to use? So the first thing I'm going to use is PowerApps. I'm going to use that as my interface to go and capture my images and my autographs. But before I go into how I'm going to use it in more detail, I'm just going to share the way that I like to pitch PowerApps with my users. And you're going to hear a lot of different takes on this throughout the day and a lot of different opinions. PowerApps for me is a way of empowering my users to actually produce the solutions to their own business problems. So they understand the problem, they understand their business processes. So who better to actually try and create the solution to that to their business problems other than the business users? Yes, I can still get involved, I can still help them, I can still guide them, But what I'm trying to do is empower them to take this on themselves, because they can then support it, they can adapt it, and they only need to call on me or on their local IT team if they're actually struggling. Then I'm going to use Flow, Microsoft's modern workflow engine, which is obviously based on Logic Apps, but is designed for the end users to be able to take a business process and create it through a nice graphical user interface. And for me, I'm going to be using Flow to to process what's actually coming out of PowerApps. Now, as I've alluded to on those two previous slides, Flow and PowerApps are both about empowering the end users. Now, that has given rise to the citizen developer, or what Microsoft dubbed the citizen developer, where it's no longer developers who are fully developing the business solutions and the applications. It's allowing users themselves to be able to pick these tools up and try and run with them. And for me, this is a massive piece of that adoption puzzle, because they're actually pulling the solutions, they're actually helping to create them, having a much larger input than what they ever have done in the past. I couldn't go through a whole solution without putting at least a little bit of SharePoint in there. And effectively, what I'm going to be using SharePoint for is for my document storage. But there are certain things which I can't achieve through either PowerApps or through Flow, at least not easily. So what I've done is I've dismounted some of that code, some of that functionality, and pushed it into an Azure function, because I've actually had to develop the code to do parts of what I'm trying to achieve, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But if you've never used an Azure function before, it's designed to be a very small, lightweight, short-running piece of code that will effectively just that you can call on, and it will just add that little bit of extra functionality into what it is that you're doing. So now I've explained each of the components, let's have a look at how I'm going to piece all these pieces of the puzzle together to create my autograph. So I'm going to take my Power App and I'm going to use that to capture my autograph and my photograph and the name of the person that I'm actually going to be taking the picture of. I'm obviously going to need somebody famous, and before anybody calls me big-headed, the famous person in that photo is actually Action Man. Ignore the fact that I'm comparing myself to Action Man in that photo. And I'm going to take his autograph, or effectively, I'm going to take a wet signature. That's going to be pulled into PowerApps. It's going to be pulled, or it's going to be processed by Flow, and it's going to use a custom connector to create the bridge between PowerApps and Flow. I'm going to store the outputs of those of the Power App in SharePoint, and then I'm going to be using an Azure function to combine those elements, so combine the photograph, combine the autograph into a Word document, so everything's in one file. And then once that's done, I'm going to return the output back to SharePoint and store that in my document library. All that sounds easy? It is fairly easy, and let's go and have a look at how we do that.
So I've already got my Power App open, and what you've got on the screen here is the Power App Studio. So this is where I can do all of my editing, I can do all of my testing, I can see how things look, I can test things. This is really my one-stop shop for everything I need to do with Power Apps. So there's a few things that I'm going to quickly point out to start off with. The first is what I like to do is a little bit of best practice. So down the left hand side under my screens list, I've got a couple of additional screens down the bottom. I've got a governance screens for documentation to outline what's in my collections and my styling. So because I can't apply code comments into my Power App, I need some way of being able to almost document what it is that I've done. So if I, for example, leave an organization, then whoever picks up the Power App development in my stead can then go and look at those. They aren't navigable by any end user. There's no way to, there's no navigation route to actually go through to it. It can only be accessed through the studio. So what I've got on my screen in the main canvas area here is I've got a number of controls. And I've got some labels, I've got a picture, and I've got an icon. And really what I want to just talk to you a little bit about is the formula bar. So formulas, if you're familiar with creating your formulas in Excel, you can apply that same sort of logic to what you can do with PowerApps. And every single attribute, or every single object I should say, has got a number of properties that I can change. Either I can hard code things or I can add formulas in there. And in this case, I want to add a little bit of functionality onto my Get New Autograph icon, and it's purely going to be just a way of moving from the front page onto a second page. So all I'm going to do is make sure that I've got my onSelect property selected, and I'm going to start to build my formula. And I can do that in a couple of ways. I have this really nice browser, function browser, so I can go and have a look in there to see if what I want is actually there. So I've got textual formulas, I've got date times, I've got logic, generally everything that you need is in there. Or alternatively, what I can actually do as well is go and start typing. So if I start typing in the formula bar, it will use IntelliSense. If you're familiar with Visual Studio or VS Code, then you'll be familiar with this, and I can start typing, and eventually I can just select what it is that I want to do. So in this case, I want to navigate. When I select a function in the formulas that needs some properties associated with it, it will tell me what they are at the top. So in this case, for the navigate, I need to give it a target, I need to give it a transition. But it'll also tell me exactly what it is that it's expecting within that particular property. So for example, the target needs the target screen to navigate to. So let's go and give it what we want it to move to, and I want it to move to my second screen, which is autograph. So I can start typing again. I can either fully type it or I can type a partial type and then select. I can separate it with a comma, so I can then say I'm now going to put in the second property, and I can say that I'm going to do a transition. It's all about the transition, so I'm going to give it a fade. So now that I've given that a very basic piece of functionality, let's just go and have a quick test of that. And I can hit the preview, the app up in the top right corner. So if I press that, it will spring it up, and yeah, exactly as I expect it, I can see my app as I saw it in my browser, and this is how effectively it will look when I look at it on a mobile device. So Get an autograph, I've just given this button here some logic, and I've just told it that I want it to go and do something. I want it to navigate, so if I click that, and it navigates across to my second page. So that just gives you an idea about the formula bar, and we'll explore a little bit more about what we can do with that as we go through. So on this first page, I'm going to collect some basic information about the user or about the person that I'm going to take the photograph of, and I want to get an autograph. And I'm going to use two different types of input for this. I'm going to use a text input and I'm going to use a pen input. Both of these are available on the insert menu, and if I click on the drop down, then I have a text input which will allow me to either type in if I'm at a desktop, or if I'm on a mobile device, it will bring up the virtual keyboard and then I can type straight into it. Or alternatively, I can use the pen input, and what that will do is, if I just click on that, it will give me this type of control. As you can see, by default there's a number of controls or a number of tools on the bottom, so being able to draw, being able to erase, being able to delete. Effectively it gives you an area that you can, using your finger or a stylus, you can actually scribble into. So it could be making notes, it could be drawing, whatever you think you can actually get into this, you've got a lot of flexibility. So I'm just going to close that down for a minute. So what I've got here is I have got my pen input. Now it looks slightly different to what I had before, and that's because over in the right hand side in the properties panel I've turned off the show controls. And if I just toggle that, there we go, so I can now see I've got my controls back again on the bottom of the pen input. But I'm just going to turn it back off again, and all I've done is resize it just by using the handles to drag and drop and just move things around on my screen. Really, really easy to really start to get the app looking the way that you want it to. What I've got again on the bottom of the screen, I've just got a navigate, and exactly the same as what we saw on the home page or on the home screen, I've got a navigate to, and it's going to navigate me to my photograph. Before I do that, I'm just going to hit a preview on this because I want to give it some data so I don't have to come back to this later. So I'm going to call this Matt C365, and I'm going to give it a nice, that's my famous autograph. Okay, and just to show that I go next, yep, there we go. So I don't have to navigate to my other pages like that. I can actually click them in the left hand side in the screen browser, and I can come to my photograph. Now this is where we're going to have a look at some of the really interesting stuff, because I really like the camera control, because it's really, there's so many uses that I've got for this already. So on my screen here I have a camera control. That is found by going to Media and by going to Camera, and that will allow us to put the control on the page, and we can again resize it to however we want it to be. There's a couple of really cool or really useful properties that are available on this, and the first is Camera. So Camera allows you to determine which of the cameras you're actually going to be using to take the photograph. Is it the primary one, or is it, if you've got a secondary, is it the secondary? Now it's really useful to be able to toggle between those, especially if you're making this for a mobile device, because you may want to use the camera that's on the front of the phone, or you may want to use the primary camera that's on the back. And I can do that by, all I've done here is I've just referenced the toggle value of a toggle control, and you can just see there that it's highlighted green because that's the one that I'm actually referencing. So if it's true, it will use one camera. If it's false, it will default to the other. So let's have a quick look at that. So I'm just going to preview. So because I'm currently speaking to you on my primary camera, it won't show you anything actually on the app itself. However, I'm going to go and toggle it because I've got a second webcam set up. So there we go. So now you can see me both here and here. Oh, freaky. I'm just going to turn it back off again. So that's how we can interact with the camera. That's how we can determine which camera we're going to use. But obviously we want to be able to capture inputs from that. And there's two ways I'm going to show you of how we can do that. The first is going to be actually on the camera control itself. But before I actually take that capture, I'm going to capture this in what's called a collection. So a collection is think of this as a session variable is probably the, if I can draw a parallel to web technology. So it will only last within a temporary memory as long as the Power App is open and running. However, what it does allow me is to put a lot of data into effectively an array and store it so that I can then use it elsewhere in my Power App. And there's a couple of ways that I can actually do that. So I'm going to go and try and capture something first of all, and I'm going to capture this on the onSelect on my camera. And if I go and I can use collect, and effectively what a collect will do is each time I press on the camera control, it will add a new entry into an array. So it will just keep going and going and going. The one that I actually want to use is because I only want to store one photograph. I'm going to use clear collect. So what that will do is if I take a second photo, it will wipe out the first one and it will replace it with whatever the new one is. So when I create a clear collect, I'm going to give it the name, give the collection a name. So I'm going to call it my autographs, and then I'm going to provide it with an array of or a number of different columns of data that I actually want it to store. So think of it as a table. So I'm going to give it a header first of all, and I'm going to call this person, and I'm going to take this from my autograph page, and it was a text control. So that's really useful if you name your controls so that you can quite easily find them again later, so you don't have to keep going back to find them. So I'm going to call it text on autograph name, and I'm going to take the text value from that. I'm going to take the autograph, and that was from my pen input, and the pen autograph will actually come through as an image. And then finally I'm going to take my camera control, which for some reason doesn't want to open up for me there, so let's try again. helps if I actually put the header in, and I'm going to take the photo. Okay, so now if I go and actually run this, I'm just going to switch my camera back on. I'm going to give it a big cheesy grin, and let's take that photo. And close back down. Actually, I'm just going to turn my camera back off because it's really creepy looking at myself in two different ways. I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to look at my collections. So when I look at my collections, I can see I've got my autograph, I've got my person, so that's the entry I put in my text field, and then I've got my photograph. But that's not necessarily the user experience that everybody wants to have. So I'm just going to wipe that out of there for a moment. I'm going to cut that, because what I actually want to do is put that functionality onto this little icon down here, so that I'm not putting my hand in front of the camera control when I'm trying to take the photo. I can actually just press the take photo button. Now for this to work, there's a couple of changes which I actually need to make to my camera control to make this work, because I can't capture the photo, I can't call that function from another control. I actually have to call stream. So if I come onto my properties, what I'm actually looking to do first of all is change my stream rate, and I'm going to set it, by default it's 0, I need to set it to something greater, so I'm going to set it to 100. And then when I actually come down to my photo down here, and let's just paste my formula back in, rather than selecting my photograph.photo, because that is a property that's only accessible from the camera control itself, I'm going to call stream. So it's going to take, so effectively I'm going to tell the camera control to take whatever you see at the moment and give that to me to use. So now if I go and run this again, let's set the camera up, let's give it a bit of a thinking pose. And let's go and have a look at my collection again. You can see that that's now actually come across onto into my collection, so I can now use that going forward. So the one thing I'm going to do just to finish this this page off is I'm just going to go and put a navigate on that button as well, because once I've taken the picture, I want to take my user to a review screen just so I can go and have a look at it. So if I want to separate add multiple formulas, all I need to do is separate it with a semicolon, and then I can start typing in my new formula. I'm going to go to my review, and I'm going to give it a transition. There we go. So if I take a picture again, there you go, it's now moving across. So now that I've actually got my photograph into a collection, I need to be able to retrieve it again. Like I say, it's stored in a collection, so it's available to me. And there's two ways that I can actually go and have a look at what's in the collection. I can go to View, I can go to Collections, and I can see my collections there. Or I can actually come down to here and I can go, I want the first option, the first item in my collection, so I'm going to select my autographs, and I want the photograph that was taken as a result of that. There we go, so there's my picture coming through, and that's coming through from the collection rather than coming directly from the camera control itself. If I wanted to iterate through multiple, so if I was actually creating lots of images in my collection, then I can use a for all, and then I can actually loop through and do and process each row in turn if I want to. I'm just going to go and repeat that same thing for the autograph. And there we go, so I've pulled both of those through. So now the only thing that I need to do is wire up my save button over here, because what I need to do is now send all of that to Flow. But before I do that, let's actually go and have a look at Flow. So what I'd like to talk about first of all is the pattern that I'm actually using in this flow. And you'll, for the developers amongst you, you'll notice that I'm using a try catch finally type pattern, and that shouldn't be anything that's unfamiliar to a developer. Basically, all of my execution takes place in the try. If there's an error, then I catch it and I handle it, and then I can do a finally if there's any wrap-up tasks which I then need to do. Now, this is available as a template. Peter Veenstra has published this into the flow gallery, so you can use this as your own pattern, or you can create it yourself. Now, when I create a flow, there's two ways that I can do it. I can either create one directly from PowerApps, and it'll give me a PowerApps trigger, or I can come in and I can create one myself, and that's effectively what I've done with this. Because what I need to use is when a HTTP request is received trigger. Now, the reason for that is because when I pass an image through from PowerApps into Flow, it comes through as an image. It comes through as an actual file. However, when I try and bring across the autograph, whilst I reference it as an image in PowerApps, it actually comes through as a URI. So it can't be handled in the same way. I can't do anything within Flow natively to try and pass that URI and download the image and then use it. So what I need to do is use a HTTP request, which will give me a HTTP endpoint, take the data through in a specific format, i.e. I'm actually going to pass it through both photograph and autograph. They'll be passed through as files. I'm going to pass a key piece of information through in the query string, and that's going to be the person's name. I'm going to take all of that and then push that into SharePoint. So when I first create my HTTP request, I have a HTTP post URL, and that is generally going to be blank until the first time I save it. But once I save it, it will generate this URL for me. If I come down into my try scope, there's a few actions that I'm actually taking place here. So by means of calling my HTTP request and triggering this flow, I'm passing in a number of JSON objects, and I can retrieve those using data actions within Flow. The first one, I'm going to get some information, I'm going to initialize my variable, and I'm going to take an input of the trigger. So if I actually click on that, I can use this trigger keyword, and that will look at whatever the trigger action is and reference that. And because I'm getting an output of a JSON body, I can tell it exactly where in that JSON I want to take the information from. So in the body, I'll have outputs, I'll have queries, and it will have, and then eventually I'll be able to select the person. Because what I want to do is pass that through, pass the person or the actual name of the person I'm taking the picture of, and pass that through as the query string parameter. Autograph and photograph I'm actually going to bring through as files, so as actual form data. So therefore I actually need to bring it through as multi-part body, and again I can use this part of an expression called trigger multi-part body, and I'm going to pass the autograph through first. So I'm actually being quite lazy here, and I'm just saying just take the first one, and that is going to be my autograph, and take the second one, so multi-part body 1, and that's going to be my photograph. And what that will do is it will bring both images through in a fully encoded image, which then allows me to use it in the next two actions, which is the create file action in SharePoint. So I can tell it where it's going to put it, I can give it my SharePoint site address, I can tell it where it's going to store it within that SharePoint site, I can tell it what it's going to be called. So I'm taking the output here from get person name, which was this action, and I'm just going to append autograph to it because this is my autograph file. And then the file content is going to be my the output of my get autograph, which is this. And I'm going to repeat the exact same thing for the create autograph file. Finally, what I'm going to do, once I've got those pieces actually stored within SharePoint, I'm going to have a HTTP call, and that is going to call an Azure function. And all that Azure function is going to do is take the data from SharePoint, along with the name, which I'm passing through as part of the request body. It's going to take the images out of SharePoint, combine them into a Word document, and then push that Word document back into SharePoint. Now, I'm not really going to go into that today because I really want to concentrate on the PowerApps and Flow element. But all it really uses is OpenXML, which I used in C#. and you just publish that straight from Visual Studio 2017 into my Azure function. There are alternatives depending on what languages you want to use. You can use Node, you can use PowerShell, whatever you want to use. Just bear in mind, if you are using PowerShell, that you do need to change the version of the Azure function back to version 1, and make sure that you have experimental languages turned on, so that you then see PowerShell. So that is effectively what my flow is, but the real question is, how do you bridge from PowerApps into Flow if you're not using the PowerApps trigger? And that is all done using a custom connector. And I'm going to basically use my HTTP post URL, which I get from my trigger. I can copy that to my clipboard, and I'm then going to come down into my data menu on the left hand side, and this is exactly the same for PowerApps as it is for Flow, and I can come down to custom connectors. So let's just leave that page. Now, custom connectors are only available if you have a plan 1 in either PowerApps or Flow. This changed on the 1st of February this year, so any new custom connectors that you're creating, you will need that plan in place. If you have a if you have a custom connector already created before that point, you have until the end of January next year, so the end of January 2020, to either upgrade your plans or to re-engineer your solution so that you're no longer using it. Those are your two options. There are alternatives, but they're the simple ones. So there's a number of ways that I can create a custom connector. I can use a create from blank, and I'll show you when I look at the autograph generator. I'll show you what that actually looks like. I've got an import from an OpenAPI file, or a Swagger file as they're more commonly known, which is a JSON definition file for what that connector actually looks like and what that connector does and how it behaves. I can import it from a URL, so if I'm using a custom connector which is going to connect to an external web service, the vendor of that web service may provide that OpenAPI file for me, and I can just connect straight onto that URL and grab that straight away. Or if I'm actually working in Postman and doing my dev there, I can generate a Postman collection and I can import that, and that will build my connector for me. Once I've actually created a connector, I've got the option to download it, but likewise I've got the option to update it as well from another OpenAPI file. So if I make a subsequent change and update it, I can update it using this rather than always going through the GUI. So you've got a number of options as to how you actually want to use this. So let's go and have a look at what my connector actually looks like. So I'm going to give it some basic information first of all. I can give it an icon, I can give it a different background colour, which I have hit and miss success of actually seeing that colour come through. I can give it a scheme, so I can tell it what it's going to connect to. Is it HTTPS or is it HTTP? And then I can tell it exactly where it's going to connect to. So this, what I've got here, this prod39 westeuropelogic.azure.com, is what was taken. So if I just fire up Notepad and bring that across, this is the URL that I actually copied from my flow trigger. Effectively what I'm doing is I'm taking the first part, and that will change depending on what region your logic app is actually running in, or your flow is running in. The second part is the workflows. So that's the base URL, so effectively that's the part that remains static throughout within my URL. After that point, within my flows or within my logic apps, that GUID afterwards will change. So you only ever go as far as workflows. That's the static part. I can tell it what security to use. I've already defined it here, so it's giving me the option to go and edit, but I can use API keys, I can define OAuth based on a number of templates as well, so I can actually base it off an Active Directory or an Azure AD authentication method, so I can put that in as well. There's some really cool things in there. But what I'm really interested in, what this definition is. Now, when I come to the definition, I need to give it an action. And the action creates a number, allows you to do a number of different things. It allows me to specify a summary. So because I'm using a custom connector, that custom connector can be used in both Flow, PowerApps, and Logic Apps. And that can be, so the summary is effectively how it's going to look when I look at it through a graphical UI, such as looking at it through Flow. I can give it a description, and I can give it an operation ID. And the operation ID is what I'll be using when I go back to my Power App in a moment to go and have a look at how we can use this. Now, the way that I actually generate the request itself, as you can see, it's pulled in a number of query items there, is I can import from a sample, and I can paste my URL that I took from Flow or from my actual web service request itself, and I can paste it in there. I can select what the verb is. I can provide it with a sample body if that's what I want to do. And when I import it, it will basically give me a graphical representation of what that action actually looks like, or what the request looks like. So I can see there I've got my URL, but it's stripped off all of the query string parameters that I actually took from Flow, and it's represented them down here instead. So I've got my API version, I've got an SP, SV, and a SIG, and a person. So for this example, I actually included a query string parameter called person on the end of my normal Flow. What I've actually done here with some of these query string parameters is, if I go in and edit them, I've made them required because I need all of these items to be provided in order for my Flow to run. But I've provided some with a default value, and I've made them internal. And what making it internal means is that my user, or my end user, will never be asked for to provide that information when they're using this connector. It will be provided automatically for them, which is really where I find a lot of power comes from using custom connectors, because as an IT administrator, I can define the connector, I can define all the things that my end users don't necessarily need to know about, and I can just ask them for the stuff which they do know about and which they actually need to provide to me. So I can say it's required, I can give it a default value, and I can effectively hide it from my user. If I go and compare that to person, then this time I've not given it a default value. I've still made it required because I still need to know that piece of information when I'm actually running my Flow. But what I've actually done is left the visibility as none or as important, and effectively none just defaults it to important. Once I've actually created that, I can download that Swagger file and I can see what's going on. So if I go back to my custom connectors, I've already downloaded this. I'm just going to go and fire up Notepad++. And we can actually have a look at what the Swagger file looks like. So this is what's actually generated by going through and using that wizard which I've just been using. However, to make this work, I've actually had to make a couple of small tweaks. The first is that I need to tell it that it's going to what it's going to consume. So by default, that won't be there, but I need to tell it it's going to pull through some form data. And what I've actually defined further down is I've also defined two key pieces of information. So there's my person. It's coming in through the query string. It's required. But I've also brought in an autograph, I've brought in a photograph. However, this time I've actually specified the type of file, because that's what I wanted to bring through from PowerApps. I don't want a URI, I don't want a string, I want a file object. So now my autograph generator is ready for me to go back and actually start using back in my Power App.
Now, before I switch back to my Power App, I am going to quickly talk to you about the Azure function. The Azure function that I've written for this is written in C#, but if I can also write my Azure functions in Node, in PowerShell, whatever it is that I want, I can write that. And it's all about just selecting the correct whichever language you want at the point that you generate your Azure function. Very briefly, all my Azure function does is it takes some basic information from flow, which is passed in through the query, passed in through the body of the HTTP request. So my Azure function receives a HTTP request, it's going to action it. All it's going to do is connect to my SharePoint site. It's going to locally copy the various files that it needs, so the photograph, the autograph, and so on, and it's going to generate a new Word document. Now, for me to do this, and for me to be able to interact and place my the relevant information into there, I've used OpenXML. So I've used NuGet and installed the OpenXML package. I've used the PnP PowerShell core NuGet package to bring in all of my PowerShell modules and libraries, and just really combined all that together to push the images into the Word document itself, and then finally push the actual photograph file or autograph file back into SharePoint.
What we want to do now is actually start using that data, using that custom connector to pass the information through to Flow so that we can actually get the whole process working. So this is what I'm interested in. I've got Matt Weston 365, I've got my photo, I've got my signature. What I actually want to do now is connect to my Flow, and to do that I actually need to refer to it as a data source. So on my view menu I can go to data sources. There's my autograph generator, so I've already brought it in, but if I go to add a data source, I can look at what the custom connections are that I've already got open. If I need to, I can go and add a new one. And this is now searchable, so I can go and actually go and find my custom connector if I can't spot it immediately. But just notice here that it has got a premium icon next to it. So like I said, you do now need a plan 1 in either PowerApps or Flow to be able to use custom connectors. Now the key thing to remember is it's not just the person who's creating the Power App or the Flow that needs the plan 1, it's also everybody that's going to be using it. So you can't get away with just buying 1 or 2 P1s, you actually need to license all the users that are going to be using it. And to be honest, that's may or may not give you value for money, depends on how often you're actually going to use these custom connectors. But probably if you are able to take what you would be buying off the shelf as a separate product and actually producing it through PowerApps, then it gives you a good chance of actually getting good value for money for what is roughly about $7 a month. So let's close that down because I've already got my data source here. So I've got my autograph generator. So what I'm going to do is now connect up my save button so that I will submit my data through my custom connector to my Flow, and then that will be processed from there. And I'm going to use the onSelect. I'm just going to drop this down so we've got a little bit of room. And I know that my data source is called autograph generator. So I'm going to select that. If I hit a dot, then it will allow me to select any of the actions which I've got defined. As I've only got one action here, I'm going to select process autograph. If I had multiples, then they would obviously be listed there. But what it's doing is, because of the way that I've defined it, it's asking me for a person, it's asking me for an autograph, and it's asking me for a photograph. So it's asking me for the key pieces of information I want. It's not asking me for any of the internal items. That was all set on the custom connector. So as an end user, I'm not going to know all that information, so that's set for me. But within my control is the person, is the autograph, and is the photograph. So let's start to populate that. And I'm going to use exactly the same mechanism as what I did when I was pulling the information out for the review. So I'm going to go and pull information out of my autographs. I want the person, I want the autograph, and I want the photograph. Okay, so that is going to call process autographs. It's going to pass all those pieces of information in. The final thing I want to do is just send my user to my success page to say that that's worked. So I'm just going to navigate to my success page. And there we go. So now that is ready for either testing in the browser or for actually utilising in one of the many ways that we can now access our Power App.
Now that I've got my fully functioning Power App, what I want to do is start to use it. And there's three ways that I'm going to show how you can interact with it. The first is going to be within SharePoint, the second will be in Microsoft Teams, and then finally I'll show you how I can interact with it on a mobile device. Now within SharePoint, I can go and edit my page. I can click add for a web part, and I can go and search for PowerApps. And I can add that onto my page. Now notice that this is in preview. So there are some elements of the functionality which I think are still lacking. And for me, the big one for this is the experience of actually adding my Power App into my SharePoint page. So it's actually asking me for an app web link or an ID. It's not giving me the ability to go and actually select it. So I'm going to jump back across into my Power Apps tab. From my Power Apps home screen, I'm going to find my app. I'm going to go to the details. And I can supply either of the two pieces of information, either the web link, which is this link here, or the app ID, which is this. Now I'm just going to select the app ID. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste that into my app web link or ID. And as you can see, it's immediately started to render and load that on my page. So now I can use my Power App as I have done whilst testing it. The second way is within Microsoft Teams. And what better way to actually add some functionality in other than adding a tab? I'm going to go and hit the plus, and notice here that I have a Power App tab. Now the experience for adding Power Apps in Teams is much richer than what it is within SharePoint. So notice that I have the ability to go and select an app, a Power App. I don't need to go and supply it with an app ID or any other element. I can search for it if I need to, and I can also filter based on the criteria listed there. So I'm going to select Autograph. I'm going to hit Save. Once again, there you go. I've now got the ability to start using that Power App within my team. But obviously, the key thing that I want to use this app for is on a mobile device that I can take it anywhere with me and collect autographs. And I'm just going to fire up my mobile. And let's just quickly connect. So I'm just firing up my phone. There we go. So I've got all my icons. I've got all my Office 365 apps installed. Notice that I have a SharePoint Power Apps. That's wrong. I have a Power Apps native app. And if I go and select that, it will sign me in, and I can then launch my app from my Power Apps app. But that's not quite what I want. I want to be able to access it straight immediately. I don't want to have to go through a number of different tabs. And I can click on the ellipsis to the right of the required app. In this case, right on the right-hand side of the autograph, and I can pin this to home. Now, by pinning to home, all it will do is add a shortcut to my home screen. So I can call it whatever I like. If I want to change the name, I can do that. I can press add, and you see now that I've actually got an icon directly on my phone itself. It's not going to launch directly into the Power App. It will actually launch the native app first of all, and then immediately redirect to the app. So like I said, it's a shortcut rather than the standalone app itself. But now let's go and start trying to use this app. So I'm going to collect some basic information. I'm here on my own, so the famous person that I'm going to be collecting the autograph for is me. So I've put my name in, I've signed my autograph. Let's come across, and there we go. You can start to see that my primary camera is working. I'm going to switch it round. There you go. Hello everybody, there's me. And I'm going to give me a big cheesy grin. And I've taken the photograph. So now that I've got the details, I can review it. Yep, that's me, Matt Weston. There's my photograph. There's my signature. Let's hit save on that. And that's going to go away and process. And there we go. There's the success. So let's just stop my room for a moment. So what has happened then in the background is obviously it's gone through the Power App, through the custom connector into Flow. It's been processed by Flow. It's been processed by the Azure function. And let's go back across to SharePoint, because what I should now see when I come to my autographs is that I have a document waiting for me called mattweston.docx. So my name. It was only modified a few seconds ago. Let's go and have a look what's actually stored in there. And there we go. There's me smiling. There's my signature. There we go. I have my autograph. So there we go. Just to recap on what it is that we've actually done, we created our Power App, which was taking a photograph and a signature from somebody famous or from anybody, using a custom connector to pass that to Flow, which would then store the initial images within SharePoint, process both of them using an Azure function, and then to combine the two into a Word document and then save it back into SharePoint. And there we go. We have our autograph book. So finally, I think I'd just like to thank everybody for joining me in this morning's session. Thank you for attending the Collab 365 Power Apps Virtual Summit. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and I hope you get lots and lots out of it. Don't forget, you can still purchase an All Access Pass, and that gives you a £50 discount voucher to use on my micro jobs or any of the other micro jobs from the other speakers today. You get some really good ebooks and plenty of savings across some of the other areas as well. So do really take advantage of that All Access Pass offer. My specific micro jobs, I have two which are on the site at the moment. The first, which is an introduction to Power Apps. So if you are still trying to help your business or your colleagues understand what Power Apps are, how you can use them, and more importantly, what the art of the possible is, then this is a session where we can go through some specific examples. We can look at how they've been used in the past, how they've been applied, and how you can actually take them forward and drive adoption within your own organization. And secondly, I have a conversion of SharePoint Designer workflows to Flow, which means if you're trying to remove your dependency on legacy technology, on technology that will eventually be deprecated, then this is a really good way of doing it, because we can work together to analyze the existing workflow, design the replacement so that we can make it better than what it has been. We can test it, and then finally we can deploy it, so you then have a fully functioning Flow. So if you've got any questions, or if you'd like to speak to me about those, please do follow the link below and they will take you to the further details. So finally, once again, thank you for joining me in this session. That was the Modern Autograph Book, a Power Apps and Flow story. I'm Matt Weston.